The neon sign flickered one last time before dying completely, casting Murphy's bar into the dim amber glow of emergency lighting. Tommy Chen wiped down the mahogany counter with practiced efficiency, his movements automatic after 15 years behind this same bar. Outside the reinforced windows of Europa Station, Jupiter's great red spot dominated the view, a swirling testament to forces beyond human control. Most nights, Tommy found the sight comforting. Tonight, something felt different. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The station's usual hum had changed. The subtle vibrations that every long-time resident learned to interpret like a heartbeat now carried an undercurrent of tension. Communications officers spoke in hushed tones at corner tables. Security personnel moved with a deliberate casualness that meant they were expecting trouble. Even the automated cargo loaders seemed to move more urgently through the docking bays visible through the observation deck. Tommy had learned to read rooms long before he'd learned to read star charts. Growing up in the slums of New Shanghai, survival had depended on understanding the subtle signals people broadcast when they were scared, angry, or desperate. Those skills had served him well during his years as a mediator for the Dockworkers Union, and they served him even better now as the owner of the most popular establishment on humanity's most remote research station. Murphy's bar existed in that peculiar space between worlds. Too far from Earth to attract tourists, too civilized for the rougher mining stations, it had become a refuge for researchers, explorers, and the occasional wanderer who found themselves at the edge of human space. Tommy had bought the place from Murphy himself, an old Irish spacer who'd claimed the bar was named after Murphy's Law. "Everything that can go wrong will go wrong," Murphy had said with a grin. "But a good bartender makes sure folks have something strong to drink while it happens." The philosophy had served Tommy well. His customers included xenobiologists studying the bacterial mats beneath Europa's ice, engineers maintaining the fusion reactors that powered the station, and pilots who pushed the boundaries of human exploration. Each brought their own problems, their own conflicts, their own need for a place where they could speak freely without fear of judgment or reprisal. Dr. Sarah Mitchell occupied her usual stool at the far end of the bar, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that had seen better days. As the station's chief xenobiologist, she'd spent the last 3 years analyzing samples from 12 different star systems, searching for patterns in how life developed across the galaxy. Tonight, she stared into her whiskey as if the amber liquid might reveal secrets that her microscopes had missed. "Rough day in the lab?" Tommy asked, refilling her glass without being asked. Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Try rough century. We've been analyzing the data from the deep survey missions, and Tommy, what we're finding doesn't make sense. Life should be random, chaotic, unpredictable. Instead, we're seeing patterns. Interventions. Someone or something has been shaping biological development across hundreds of star systems." Tommy had heard variations of this conversation before. Sarah's team had been pushing the boundaries of astrobiology for years, but lately, their discoveries had taken on an urgency that seemed to unsettle even the most experienced researchers. He'd learned not to dismiss their concerns. Scientists who spent their careers studying the unknown tended to recognize genuine mysteries when they encountered them. "Shaping how?" Tommy asked, genuinely curious. His customers' work fascinated him, partly because he'd never had the formal education to pursue it himself, and partly because their discoveries often provided insights into human nature that formal psychology missed. Sarah pulled up a holographic display from her tablet, showing a 3-dimensional map dotted with stars. "Look at this. 17 star systems, all within 100 light-years of each other. Each one shows evidence of biological acceleration. Evolution that should take millions of years happening in thousands. Genetic modifications that appear designed rather than natural, and all of it following similar patterns." The display rotated slowly, revealing clusters of activity that formed an almost geometric precision across space. Tommy had spent enough time listening to Sarah's theories to recognize when she was building towards something significant. "Someone's been gardening," Tommy observed. "Exactly." Sarah's voice carried a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "But gardening implies a gardener. And if someone's been actively managing biological development across hundreds of worlds for millions of years, that means we're not alone. More importantly, it means we're probably not in charge. Before Tommy could respond, the bar's main door chimed, and Captain David Rodriguez entered with the measured stride of someone trying not to appear rushed. David commanded the research vessel Aurora, one of the few ships capable of the long-range missions that had provided Sarah's data. His weathered face and steady gray eyes had seen more of the galaxy than most humans would in a dozen lifetimes, but tonight he looked troubled in a way that went beyond simple fatigue. "Tommy, I need to talk to Sarah," David said without preamble. "And I think we're going to need somewhere private." Tommy gestured toward the back room, where he sometimes hosted private meetings for station personnel. "Conference room's yours. I'll make sure you're not disturbed." As Sarah and David moved toward the back room, Tommy noticed the way other customers had subtly shifted their attention toward the pair. The station might be remote, but news traveled fast in small communities. If something significant was happening, word would spread quickly through the informal networks that kept isolated places like Europa Station connected to the larger human community. 20 minutes later, Sarah emerged from the back room looking pale. David followed, his expression grim. They returned to their seats at the bar, but neither spoke immediately. Tommy had learned when to push for information and when to let people process in their own time. He busied himself cleaning glasses and waited. "Tommy," Sarah finally said, "how much do you know about first contact protocols?" The question surprised him. "Enough to know they exist." "Why?" David leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the background noise of the bar. "Because we might need them. The Aurora just returned from the Kepler 442 system. We found something." Tommy set down the glass he'd been cleaning. "Something as in life, or something as in trouble?" "Both," Sarah replied. David's crew discovered a structure in orbit around Kepler -442b. Artificial, massive, and definitely not human. But more importantly, it appears to be a monitoring station. Someone's been watching the biological development on that planet for a very long time. The implications hit Tommy immediately. If someone had been monitoring life across multiple star systems, they were dealing with a civilization far more advanced than humanity. More troubling, if monitoring stations existed, it meant someone was actively overseeing the biological processes Sarah had been studying. "Are they still there?" Tommy asked. David nodded slowly. "The structure is functional, but we detected no signs of current activity. It appears to be automated, possibly running for thousands of years without direct supervision. But Tommy, here's the thing that's got us both worried. Based on its position and sensor array, that station has been monitoring more than just Kepler, -442b. Its range includes Earth." The bar seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the conversation had reached a threshold that demanded respect. Tommy felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with being trusted with significant information. His customers often shared things with him that they couldn't discuss elsewhere, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of secret that could change everything. "How long have they been watching us?" Tommy asked. Sarah consulted her tablet, pulling up data streams that meant nothing to Tommy but clearly carried significant implications for her. "Based on the technology we could analyze from long-range sensors, possibly since before human civilization began." "Tommy, if this monitoring network is as extensive as we think it is, then someone has been watching human development for thousands of years." The weight of that statement settled over the three of them like a physical presence. Tommy had spent years listening to the problems and concerns of people who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge, but this was the first time he'd encountered something that challenged the fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe. "What happens now?" Tommy asked. David's expression grew even more serious. "That's the problem. Command wants to send a full expedition to investigate. They're talking about making contact, assuming anyone's still monitoring the station. But Sarah and I think that might be a mistake." "Why?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because of what we found on Kepler 442b itself. The planet shows signs of biological intervention, but not the kind that promotes diversity or evolution. Someone has been systematically reducing biological complexity. Species that should exist are missing. Evolutionary paths that should have developed were cut short. Someone's been pruning life from that world for millions of years. Tommy felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bar's climate control. Pruning how? Extinctions, David replied. Targeted, precise, and thorough. Whoever built that monitoring station has been actively managing life on Kepler-442b, and their management philosophy seems to involve eliminating anything that becomes too complex or too independent. The implications were staggering. If an advanced civilization had been monitoring Earth for thousands of years, and if their approach to biological management involved eliminating complex or independent life forms, then humanity's recent expansion into space might have attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. How many people know about this? Tommy asked. Too many, Sarah admitted. The Aurora's crew, command staff, probably intelligence services by now. This is too big to contain. But David and I are worried that the official response might make things worse. Tommy understood their concern. Military and political leaders faced with evidence of a superior alien civilization would likely respond with either aggression or submission, both of which could prove disastrous if they were dealing with beings who had been managing galactic life for millions of years. What do you think the right response is? Tommy asked. David and Sarah exchanged glances, the kind of look that passed between people who had been grappling with an impossible problem for hours without finding an answer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We don't know, David admitted, but we think it might help to understand why they've been watching us. If they've been monitoring Earth for thousands of years but haven't intervened, there might be rules or protocols we don't understand. Maybe they only act when certain thresholds are crossed. Like what kind of thresholds? Sarah pulled up another display, showing a timeline of human technological development. Space travel, nuclear weapons, genetic engineering. All the developments that would make us visible to anyone monitoring our planet. Tommy, what if our expansion into space triggered some kind of automated response? What if the monitoring stations aren't just watching anymore? Before Tommy could respond, the bar's communication system activated with a priority alert tone that he'd never heard before. The voice that followed belonged to Station Commander Patricia Walsh, and her words carried the kind of formal weight that meant everyone on Europa Station was about to learn something that would change their lives. All personnel, this is Commander Walsh. We have received an official communication from Earth Command regarding a significant development in deep space exploration. All off-duty personnel are requested to report to their duty stations. This is not a drill. Station security protocols are now in effect. Please remain calm and await further instructions. The announcement cut off, leaving the bar in complete silence. Tommy looked around at his customers, noting the mixture of curiosity and apprehension on their faces. Scientists, engineers, and support staff all processing the same question. What kind of development required security protocols on a research station at the edge of human space? Sarah's tablet chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at it, and Tommy watched her expression shift from concern to something approaching fear. What is it? David asked. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Message from Dr. Peterson at the Xenobiology Institute. They've detected multiple objects moving toward the solar system. Large objects, traveling faster than anything we can build. Estimated arrival time is 72 hours. Tommy felt the familiar sensation he'd experienced in difficult negotiations, the moment when all parties realized they were dealing with something larger than their individual concerns. The monitoring stations weren't just watching anymore. Someone was coming. David stood up, his military training taking over. I need to get to the Aurora. If something's heading for Earth, they'll want every available ship ready for deployment. Sarah remained seated, staring at her tablet as more data streams updated in real time. Tommy, according to this, the objects aren't just heading for Earth. They're heading for every human colony, every research station, every outpost we've established in the last 50 years. Someone knows exactly where we are and exactly how far we've spread. Tommy watched David leave the bar with quick, purposeful strides. Around the room, other customers were receiving similar messages, their conversations shifting from casual discussion to urgent planning. The atmosphere of Europa Station was changing, transforming from a remote research facility into something approaching a military outpost. "Sarah," Tommy said quietly, "in your professional opinion, are we looking at first contact or an invasion?" Sarah's laugh held no humor. "Based on what happened to Kepler-442b, I'm not sure there's a difference. Tommy, whoever's coming has been managing galactic life for millions of years. They've been watching us develop, and now that we've reached a certain level of technological advancement, they're responding. The question isn't whether this is first contact. The question is whether we'll survive it." Tommy poured himself a drink, something he rarely did while working. The whiskey burned, but it helped him focus on the immediate challenges. His bar had always served as an informal meeting place for people dealing with problems that couldn't be solved through official channels. Now, faced with the possibility of contact with a civilization that had been shaping galactic life for eons, he wondered if the skills he'd developed mediating human conflicts might prove relevant on a much larger scale. "Sarah, tell me about the patterns you've been studying. If these beings have been managing life across hundreds of systems, they must have consistent methods, predictable approaches. What do we know about how they operate?" Sarah seemed grateful to focus on data, rather than implications. She pulled up her research files, displaying charts and graphs that represented years of analysis across multiple star systems. "From what we can determine, they seem to follow biological management principles," Sarah explained. "They allow life to develop to a certain point, then intervene to prevent what they might consider excessive complexity or independence. On worlds where they've been active, we see evidence of civilizations that reached roughly our current level of development, then experienced sudden population reductions or technological reversals." Tommy studied the data, looking for patterns that might suggest negotiable positions rather than absolute policies. How sudden? Geological records suggest most interventions occurred over periods of decades rather than years. Not immediate extinction, but systematic reduction until populations stabilized at levels that apparently met their management criteria. "That suggests they're not interested in complete elimination," Tommy observed. "They want sustainable populations rather than empty worlds. That's something we can work with." Sarah looked at him with something approaching hope. "You think this might be negotiable?" Tommy had spent years mediating disputes between groups with seemingly incompatible positions. The key was usually finding the underlying interests that both parties shared, then building solutions that addressed those interests without requiring either side to abandon their core principles. "Every conflict has underlying interests," Tommy replied. "If these beings have been managing galactic life for millions of years, they must have reasons beyond simple control. The question is whether those reasons are compatible with human survival and development." The bar's communication system activated again, this time with a different tone that indicated station-wide broadcast rather than priority alert. "All personnel, this is Commander Walsh with an update. We have established communication with the approaching vessels. They have identified themselves as representatives of what they call the Cultivation Protocol. They have requested a meeting with designated human representatives to discuss our species' integration into galactic biological management systems. The meeting will take place in 72 hours, at coordinates they have provided. Please continue with assigned duties while we prepare for this historic contact." Tommy and Sarah exchanged glances. The formal language of the announcement couldn't disguise the reality that humanity was about to face judgment from beings who had been shaping galactic life since before human civilization existed. "Integration into galactic biological management systems," Sarah repeated. "That doesn't sound like negotiation." "That sounds like absorption." Tommy nodded, but he was thinking about the specific language used. They requested a meeting rather than demanding surrender. They provided coordinates rather than simply arriving at Earth. Someone who's been managing life for millions of years doesn't need to be polite unless politeness serves a purpose. What kind of purpose? Maybe they've learned that willing cooperation produces better results than forced compliance. Or maybe they've encountered species before that found ways to negotiate alternative arrangements. Sarah's tablet chimed again with another message. This time, her expression shifted from apprehension to something approaching amazement. "Tommy, this message is from Command. They want to assemble a negotiation team for the meeting with the Cultivation Protocol." They're asking for specialists in biology, technology, psychology, and conflict resolution. Tommy waited for her to continue. They've included your name on the list of potential team members. The suggestion surprised him. I'm a bartender, Sarah. I don't have credentials in diplomacy or xenobiology. No, but you have something else, Sarah replied. You have a reputation for resolving conflicts that official channels couldn't handle. The Dockworkers' strike of '89, the mining rights dispute on Ceres, the terraforming labor crisis on Mars. Tommy, you've been mediating between groups with incompatible positions for decades. Maybe that's exactly what humanity needs right now. Tommy considered the possibility. His experience had been with human conflicts, but the underlying principles might translate to interspecies negotiations. Every successful mediation required understanding what each party truly needed, distinguishing between stated positions and underlying interests, and finding creative solutions that addressed core concerns without requiring anyone to lose face. What makes Command think I'd be qualified for something like this? Sarah showed him her tablet, displaying a personnel file that contained more information about his background than he'd expected Command to possess. Because they've been studying your methods. The report says you have an unusual ability to find common ground between parties who initially appear to have nothing in common. More importantly, you have a track record of creating agreements that hold up over time because they address underlying needs rather than just immediate demands. Tommy read through the file, noting details about his mediation work that he'd assumed had gone unnoticed by official channels. Someone had been paying attention to his methods, analyzing his approaches, and apparently concluded that his skills might prove relevant to interspecies negotiation. Assuming I agreed to participate, what would that involve? Transport to the meeting coordinates, participation in discussions with beings who've been managing galactic life for millions of years, and hopefully finding a way to ensure human survival without compromising human independence. Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. No pressure. Tommy, I've been studying alien biology for years, but I've never had to negotiate with alien intelligence. David's explored more of space than almost any human alive, but he's never had to find common ground with beings who think in geological timescales. You're the only person I know who consistently finds solutions to impossible problems. The weight of the suggestion settled over Tommy like a physical presence. His entire career had been built on helping people resolve conflicts that seemed unresolvable. But those conflicts had involved humans with shared cultural references and biological imperatives. Mediating between humanity and beings who had been shaping galactic life for eons represented a challenge beyond anything he'd ever attempted. But as he looked around the bar, seeing his customers' faces reflecting the same mixture of hope and apprehension he felt himself, Tommy realized that someone had to try. If the cultivation protocol had been managing life across hundreds of systems for millions of years, they must have encountered countless species facing the same transition humanity now faced. Some of those species had presumably survived and found ways to coexist with galactic management systems. Others had apparently been pruned from existence. The difference might come down to the quality of the initial negotiation. Sarah, if I agree to participate in this negotiation, I'm going to need everything we know about the cultivation protocol's methods, their history, and their apparent objectives. More importantly, I'm going to need to understand what humanity truly needs to survive and thrive, not just what we want to preserve. Sarah nodded eagerly. I can provide all the biological and technological data we've gathered. But, Tommy, what do you think humanity truly needs? Tommy considered the question carefully. His years of mediation had taught him that successful agreements required honest assessment of core needs, rather than negotiating positions based on pride or tradition. We need the freedom to continue developing as a species, Tommy said finally. We need the ability to explore, to grow, to make our own mistakes and learn from them. But we also need to survive long enough to do those things. If the cultivation protocol sees unmanaged development as a threat to galactic stability, we need to find ways to demonstrate that human growth can be compatible with their larger objectives. And if it can't be? Tommy met her gaze steadily. Then we need to find out what they're willing to accept as an alternative to elimination. Every negotiation has a zone of possible agreement. Our job is to find it before they decide we're too dangerous to preserve. Sarah gathered her research materials, preparing to leave the bar and begin compiling the information Tommy would need for the most important negotiation in human history. Tommy, there's one more thing you should know. According to the data we've gathered, the cultivation protocol doesn't just manage individual planets or species. They manage entire galactic regions. If humanity can find a way to coexist with them, we might gain access to knowledge and resources beyond anything we've imagined. But if we can't... She didn't need to finish the statement. Tommy understood the stakes. Humanity stood at a threshold that would determine not just their immediate survival, but their long-term potential as a galactic species. The negotiation ahead would shape the future of human civilization for generations to come. As Sarah left the bar to begin her preparations, Tommy remained behind, cleaning glasses and thinking about the challenge ahead. In 72 hours, he would sit across a table from beings who had been shaping galactic life since before humans had discovered agriculture. Everything he'd learned about conflict resolution, every insight he'd gained into finding common ground between seemingly incompatible positions, would be tested against the most consequential negotiation in human history. The stakes couldn't be higher, but Tommy felt the familiar calm that came with accepting responsibility for something larger than himself. Somewhere in the galaxy, other species had faced this same test. Some had found ways to thrive under galactic management. Others had been reduced to sustainable populations that met protocol standards but sacrificed independence and growth potential. Humanity's outcome would depend on the next 72 hours of preparation and the negotiation that followed. Tommy began making mental notes about the information he would need, the strategies he might employ, and the creative solutions that might bridge the gap between human aspirations and galactic management requirements. Outside the bar's windows, Jupiter's Great Red Spot continued its ancient rotation, a reminder that some forces were beyond human control. But inside Murphy's bar, a former dockworker turned bartender was preparing to negotiate humanity's future with beings who had been managing such forces for millions of years. The real work was about to begin. The transport ship Meridian cut through space toward the designated coordinates with the kind of quiet efficiency that masked the enormity of its mission. Tommy Chen sat in the observation lounge, watching stars wheel past the viewport while reviewing the massive data compilations Sarah had prepared for him. 3 days of intensive briefings had filled his mind with information about galactic biology, technological capabilities, and the scattered evidence of civilizations that had faced the cultivation protocol before humanity. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission's lead xenopsychologist, occupied the seat across from him. Her dark eyes focused on behavioral analysis charts that attempted to predict alien decision-making patterns. Commander Rebecca Stone, Earth's most experienced diplomat, worked at a portable desk covered with treaty frameworks and negotiation protocols from every significant human agreement of the past century. The small team represented humanity's best attempt to prepare for a conversation that would determine their species' future. "Tommy, I've been thinking about what you said regarding underlying interests," Elena said, looking up from her charts. "If the cultivation protocol has been managing galactic life for millions of years, their primary interest might not be control for its own sake. It might be stability." Tommy nodded, setting aside a report on extinct civilizations that made for depressing reading. "That's what I'm hoping. Systems that have operated successfully for millions of years don't usually change their methods without good reason. If they've requested negotiation rather than simply implementing their standard protocols, something about humanity must seem different to them." Commander Stone paused in her work, considering the implications. "Different how? We're not the most technologically advanced species they've encountered. According to the archaeological evidence, several civilizations reached much higher levels of development before their populations were reduced." Tommy had been puzzling over the same question. Every successful mediation required understanding what made the current situation unique. What factors might create opportunities for creative solutions that hadn't existed in previous cases. "Maybe it's not about our technology," Tommy suggested. "Maybe it's about our approach to development. Look at human history. We've been fighting each other for thousands of years, but we've also been learning to coexist, despite fundamental differences. Most species probably develop more uniformly, with single dominant cultures that expand across their worlds. Humans have always been diverse, fractured, constantly negotiating between competing groups." Elena's expression brightened with understanding. You think our experience with internal conflict might be seen as an asset rather than a liability? Consider it from their perspective, Tommy continued. They've been managing species that presumably developed along more predictable lines. Unified civilizations that expanded according to coherent plans. With consistent approaches to technology and expansion, suddenly they encounter a species that's been practicing conflict resolution and creative compromise for its entire development. We might represent something they haven't seen before. Commander Stone pulled up historical data on her tablet, scanning through records of human expansion into space. The evidence supports that theory. Most species that achieved interstellar travel probably did so through coordinated effort by unified planetary governments. Humans reached space through competition between rival nations, then learned to cooperate despite maintaining separate political systems. Our approach to development has been chaotic but remarkably adaptive. Tommy felt the familiar spark of insight that came when seemingly unrelated factors began forming a coherent pattern. That adaptability might be what interests them. A species that can maintain diversity while achieving coordination, that can compete and cooperate simultaneously, represents a different kind of biological success. Instead of seeing us as a threat to stability, they might see us as a potential solution to problems they've encountered with other management approaches. The ship's communication system activated with a soft chime, indicating they were approaching the designated meeting coordinates. Captain Maria Santos, the Meridian's commanding officer, spoke from the bridge with the calm professionalism that characterized experienced deep space crews. All passengers, we are arriving at the rendezvous point. Please prepare for potential gravitic anomalies as we approach the alien vessels. Tommy moved to the main viewport, joining Elena and Rebecca as they got their first direct view of the cultivation protocol's technology. What they saw challenged every assumption about spacecraft design that human engineering had developed. The alien vessels appeared to be grown, rather than built. Organic curves flowed into geometric patterns that suggested mathematical principles beyond human understanding. The largest ship stretched nearly 10 kilometers in length, its surface covered with structures that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Smaller vessels moved around it in formations that resembled schools of fish more than military formations. "My God," Elena whispered. "They're not just managing biological systems, they're biological systems." Tommy studied the alien ships, noting how their movements seemed coordinated without visible communication systems. The implications were staggering. Humanity was about to negotiate with beings who had integrated biological and technological development to degrees that human science could barely comprehend. "Rebecca, does anything in your diplomatic protocols cover negotiation with entities that might operate as collective organisms?" Commander Stone's laugh held no humor. "Tommy, nothing in human diplomatic history covers anything remotely like this. We're going to be improvising every step." The Meridian's docking systems engaged with one of the smaller alien vessels through a process that involved the ships literally growing connection points to interface with each other. Tommy watched the organic technology adapt in real time to accommodate human engineering requirements, demonstrating capabilities that suggested the cultivation protocol could modify their technology as easily as humans might adjust their clothing. "Final preparations," Captain Santos announced. "Environmental scans indicate the alien vessel maintains atmosphere compatible with human physiology. Translation systems are operational, though we should expect communication delays as the systems adapt to linguistic patterns they've never encountered." Tommy gathered his materials, including Sarah's biological analyses, Elena's psychological profiles, and Rebecca's treaty frameworks. More importantly, he focused his mind on the mediation principles that had guided his most successful negotiations. Find common ground. Understand underlying needs. Create solutions that allowed all parties to achieve their core objectives without losing essential dignity. The airlock cycled through its sequence, revealing a corridor that challenged human perceptions of interior design. The walls curved in ways that suggested infinite depth, while somehow maintaining structural integrity. Lighting came from surfaces that glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns they'd observed on the ship's exterior. The overall effect was beautiful but deeply alien, reminding them that they were entering a realm shaped by minds that had evolved along completely different paths. They walked through corridors that seemed to anticipate their movement, with pathways opening ahead of them and closing behind them in flows that felt organic rather than mechanical. Tommy found the experience oddly comforting rather than threatening. The ship felt alive, but not predatory, more like being inside a vast creature that was curious about its guests. The meeting chamber they entered defied geometric classification. The space seemed both intimate and vast, with surfaces that curved away into distances that might have been optical illusions or actual dimensional manipulations. At the center of the chamber, three beings waited at what appeared to be a conference area that had grown from the ship's floor. Tommy's first impression of the cultivation protocol representatives was that they embodied the same integration of biological and technological elements he'd observed in their ships. Each being stood roughly 3 meters tall, with forms that seemed to shift between plant and animal characteristics. Their skin displayed the same bioluminescent patterns as their technology, suggesting communication methods that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The central figure stepped forward with movements that flowed like water despite their substantial size. When they spoke, their voice came from translation systems that somehow conveyed emotional undertones along with linguistic content. Welcome, representatives of the species designated human. I am Primary Cultivator Zethrin, speaking for the cultivation protocol in this region of the galaxy. We have observed your development with considerable interest. Tommy stepped forward, drawing on decades of experience with difficult negotiations. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Primary Cultivator Zethrin. I am Tommy Chen, speaking for humanity in these discussions. We appreciate the opportunity to understand your perspectives and share our own. The second alien figure, slightly smaller than Zethrin but with more complex bioluminescent patterns, moved closer to the group. I am Growth Analyst Morvek. Your species presents unusual characteristics that require discussion before standard integration protocols can be implemented. Rebecca took the diplomatic lead she'd been trained for. Commander Rebecca Stone, representing Earth's political leadership. We're honored by this contact and hope to establish productive relationships that benefit both our species and galactic stability. The third alien, whose form seemed to shift more dramatically than the others, remained at the conference area but spoke with tones that the translation system rendered as musical. I am Pattern Weaver Ninth. The biological matrices your species has developed across multiple worlds show unprecedented diversity within unified progression. This requires analysis. Tommy felt the negotiation beginning in earnest. The aliens had opened with statements that revealed their priorities while requesting information about human capabilities. Now came the crucial phase of determining whether productive discussion was possible or whether humanity was facing a formal judgment process with predetermined outcomes. Pattern Weaver Ninth, we're curious about what you mean by unprecedented diversity within unified progression, Tommy said, choosing to address the comment that seemed most open to exploration. Nith's form shifted into configurations that reminded Tommy of mathematical diagrams. Most species that achieve interstellar capabilities do so through singular developmental paths. Unity of purpose drives technological advancement, which enables expansion across multiple worlds. Your species achieved similar results through competing developmental paths that somehow maintained overall coherence. This pattern has not been observed in our previous encounters. Elena stepped forward, recognizing an opportunity to share her expertise. Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenopsychologist. What Pattern Weaver Nith describes reflects humanity's fundamental approach to problem solving. We maintain diversity as a survival strategy, exploring multiple solutions simultaneously rather than committing to single approaches. Growth Analyst Morvek's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Tommy interpreted as heightened attention. This approach suggests adaptive capabilities that could prove valuable for long-term stability. However, it also introduces unpredictability that complicates management protocols. Tommy sensed the opening he'd been hoping for. The aliens weren't simply evaluating humanity for standard processing. They were genuinely uncertain about how to categorize human development patterns, which meant there might be room for negotiation rather than just acceptance of predetermined terms. Growth Analyst Morvek, could you help us understand what you mean by management protocols? We're interested in learning how the cultivation protocol approaches species development across the galaxy. Primary Cultivator Zethrin responded with what the translation system conveyed as formal explanation. The cultivation protocol has maintained galactic biological stability for 7 million standard years. Species that achieve interstellar capabilities trigger evaluation protocols to determine their integration into established management systems. Most species require population adjustment and technological limitation to maintain sustainable development patterns. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise what Zethrin was describing. Tommy had read the reports on extinct civilizations, the archaeological evidence of populations reduced to levels that eliminated their potential for continued technological development. But the fact that they were explaining their methods rather than simply implementing them suggested that humanity's case was being treated differently. Primary cultivator Zethrin, when you mention population adjustment and technological limitation, are you referring to the patterns Dr. Mitchell's research identified on worlds like Kepler-442b? Zethrin's patterns shifted to what might have been acknowledgement. Correct. Most species require guidance to achieve sustainable equilibrium with galactic biological systems. Unmanaged expansion typically results in resource depletion, biological destabilization, and eventual species collapse. Protocol intervention prevents such outcomes while preserving essential genetic diversity. Rebecca leaned forward, her diplomatic training focusing on the implications of Zethrin's statement. When you refer to essential genetic diversity, are you suggesting that protocol intervention allows species to survive but prevents them from continuing independent development? Accurate assessment, growth analyst Morvek replied. Independent development, beyond certain thresholds, typically leads to biological instability that affects multiple star systems. Protocol management ensures species survival within sustainable parameters. Tommy felt the negotiation reaching its critical phase. The cultivation protocol was essentially offering humanity a choice between managed survival and the risk of extinction through uncontrolled development. But their willingness to explain their positions suggested they might be open to alternative arrangements if humanity could demonstrate that continued independence wouldn't threaten galactic stability. Pattern Weaver Knife, you mentioned that human development patterns haven't been observed in previous encounters. Could humanity's adaptive diversity approach offer benefits to galactic biological stability rather than threatening it? Knife's form shifted into patterns that suggested complex calculation. Theoretical possibility exists. Species capable of maintaining diversity while achieving coordination might develop solutions to problems that have required protocol intervention with other civilizations. However, such capabilities would require demonstration under controlled conditions. Elena recognized the opportunity immediately. What kind of demonstration would provide the evidence you need? Primary cultivator Zethrin exchanged communication patterns with the other two aliens before responding. The cultivation protocol has encountered persistent challenges in certain galactic regions where standard management approaches have proven insufficient. If humanity can demonstrate adaptive solutions to these challenges, alternative arrangements might be considered. Tommy felt the familiar excitement that came when impossible negotiations suddenly revealed potential solutions. The cultivation protocol wasn't just offering humanity a test. They were essentially proposing a partnership arrangement where human adaptive capabilities could be used to solve problems that their traditional methods couldn't address. What kind of challenges are you facing? Tommy asked. Growth analyst Morvek's patterns shifted to what the translation system rendered as concern. Several galactic regions contain species that have achieved interstellar capabilities but resist standard integration protocols. These species have developed technologies and social structures that make traditional management approaches ineffective. The resulting instability threatens biological systems across multiple star systems. Rebecca saw the diplomatic implications immediately. You're dealing with rebellions? Inaccurate characterization, Pattern Weaver Nith replied. These species have developed adaptive responses to protocol intervention that prevent successful implementation of management systems. Rather than accepting sustainable limitations, they continue expanding in ways that create cumulative destabilization. Tommy began to understand the larger picture. The cultivation protocol had achieved galactic stability through methods that worked with most species, but they were now encountering civilizations that had learned to resist their traditional approaches. Rather than escalating their intervention methods, they were looking for alternative solutions that could address the underlying problems without requiring the elimination of resistant species. So you're looking for mediators, Tommy said. Species that can find ways to achieve stability without requiring force or elimination. Primary cultivator Zethrin's patterns brightened significantly. Accurate assessment. Human adaptive capabilities combined with demonstrated conflict resolution experience suggest potential for developing solutions that address both species independence and galactic stability requirements. Elena leaned forward, her excitement obvious. Are you proposing that humanity serve as intermediaries between the cultivation protocol and resistant species? Preliminary proposal only, growth analyst Morvac cautioned. Such arrangements would require extensive demonstration of human capabilities under actual conditions. Failure would result in standard protocol implementation for all involved species. Tommy felt the weight of the opportunity and the risk it represented. Humanity was being offered a chance to avoid population reduction and technological limitation, but only by accepting responsibility for solving conflicts that the cultivation protocol itself had been unable to resolve. Success could establish humanity as partners in galactic management. Failure would result in the elimination of both humanity and the species they failed to help. How many resistant species are we talking about? Rebecca asked. Pattern Weaver Ninth's form shifted through configurations that suggested large numbers. Current estimates indicate 47 species across 12 galactic regions have developed resistance capabilities that prevent successful protocol implementation. These species collectively control approximately 300 star systems and continue expanding despite intervention attempts. The scope of the challenge was staggering. Humanity was being asked to mediate between dozens of alien civilizations and a galactic management system that had operated successfully for millions of years. The diplomatic and logistical complexities alone would challenge human capabilities in ways they'd never been tested. But Tommy also recognized the underlying opportunity. If humanity could successfully mediate these conflicts, they would establish themselves as essential partners in galactic civilization rather than just another managed species. The risk was enormous, but the potential rewards included not just survival but genuine independence and influence on a galactic scale. Primary cultivator Zethrin, if humanity agrees to attempt mediation with these resistant species, what resources and support would the cultivation protocol provide? Zethrin's patterns shifted to what seemed like approval. Full access to protocol biological and technological databases, transportation capabilities across galactic distances, communication systems compatible with all known species. Most importantly, temporary suspension of standard integration protocols for humanity while mediation attempts proceed. Elena asked the question that Tommy had been building toward. And if we succeed in developing solutions that work for both the resistant species and protocol stability requirements? Successful mediation would establish humanity as protocol partners rather than managed subjects, growth analyst Morvac replied. Such status has never been offered to species at your current development level, but circumstances require adaptation of traditional approaches. Tommy felt the negotiation reaching its conclusion. The cultivation protocol had essentially offered humanity a deal that could transform them from potential victims of galactic management into active participants in galactic civilization. The risks were enormous, but the alternative was accepting limitation and supervision that would end humanity's independent development. We'll need time to discuss this proposal with our leadership, Rebecca said, fulfilling her diplomatic obligations. Time limitations exist, Pattern Weaver Nith replied. Resistant species continue destabilizing activities. Protocol intervention will proceed with or without human participation if instability exceeds acceptable thresholds. Tommy understood the implicit deadline. Humanity had a limited window to accept the partnership proposal and begin demonstrating their mediation capabilities. If they delayed too long, the cultivation protocol would implement their traditional solutions, which would likely include humanity among the species requiring population adjustment. How much time do we have? Tommy asked. Primary cultivator Zethrin's patterns indicated calculation. Standard galactic rotation cycle. Approximately 3 Earth years to demonstrate measurable progress with initial mediation attempts. The timeline was tight but workable. 2 years to prove that human adaptive capabilities could solve conflicts that had resisted traditional protocol methods for potentially centuries. If they succeeded, humanity would secure not just survival but partnership in galactic civilization. If they failed, both humanity and the species they attempted to help would face elimination. Tommy looked at Elena and Rebecca, seeing his own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in their expressions. They had entered the negotiation, hoping to avoid humanity's absorption into galactic management systems. Instead, they were being offered the chance to help reshape those systems entirely. The stakes couldn't be higher, but the opportunity was unprecedented. Humanity stood at the threshold of becoming either partners in galactic civilization or casualties of their own ambitions. The real work was about to begin. 18 months later, Tommy stood in the command center of New Geneva Station, watching real-time feeds from 7 different star systems where human mediation teams were working with previously resistant species. The holographic displays showed a galaxy transformed, with former conflict zones now hosting collaborative research stations and joint development projects. The breakthrough had come 6 months into the project when Tommy realized that the resistant species weren't actually opposing the cultivation protocol's goals. They were rejecting the methods. Each civilization had developed unique solutions to the same problems protocol management was designed to address, but their approaches didn't fit traditional frameworks that required standardized implementation across all worlds. The Kythera Collective had developed biological technologies that maintained ecosystem stability through symbiotic relationships rather than population control. The Nexian Empire had created economic systems that prevented resource depletion through voluntary redistribution rather than technological limitation. The Valdris Republic had achieved sustainable expansion by establishing strict rotation policies that prevented any single world from being overexploited. Instead of forcing these species to abandon their successful innovations, Tommy had proposed something revolutionary. Why not integrate their solutions into protocol management systems, creating flexible approaches that could adapt to different species' natural development patterns while maintaining overall galactic stability? Primary cultivator Zethrin materialized through the quantum communication system that had become standard equipment on all human stations. The aliens' bioluminescent patterns now included colors that hadn't existed during their first meeting, indicating evolutionary adaptations that protocol beings underwent when exposed to new ideas. Mediator Chen, the Integration Council, has completed analysis of the collaborative frameworks your teams established. Results exceed all projected parameters for sustainable galactic development. Tommy smiled at the formal title that had replaced his bartender designation in protocol communications. The resistant species had already solved most of the problems they appeared to be creating. They just needed ways to share their solutions without abandoning their cultural identities. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered the command center carrying data tablets filled with psychological profiles of the newly integrated civilizations. Her work had expanded from studying single species to analyzing the interaction patterns between dozens of different galactic cultures working together for the first time in millions of years. Tommy, the Valdris delegation just transmitted their proposal for joint terraforming projects with 3 former protocol client species. They're offering to share their rotation technologies in exchange for access to protocol biological databases. It's exactly the kind of voluntary cooperation that traditional management systems couldn't achieve. Commander Rebecca Stone joined them via holographic projection from Earth, where she was coordinating humanity's new role as official mediators for the expanded Galactic Cooperation Framework. The title reflected the fundamental change in how galactic civilization was organized, shifting from centralized management to collaborative development guided by shared stability goals. The numbers are remarkable, Rebecca reported. 43 of the 47 resistant species have successfully integrated into collaborative frameworks. Resource efficiency across protocol territories has increased by 37%. Most importantly, we're seeing innovation rates that haven't been achieved in over 2 million years. Tommy had learned that innovation was the key metric protocol beings used to evaluate galactic health. Stable systems were good, but stable systems that continued developing new solutions to emerging challenges were optimal. The collaborative frameworks had unleashed creative capabilities that centralized management necessarily suppressed. Pattern Weaver Nith's form materialized next to Zethrin, its shifting geometries now incorporating patterns that human mathematicians were still trying to understand. Mediator Chen, the most significant development involves species that previously required direct protocol intervention. Integration of collaborative methods has eliminated the need for population adjustment protocols in 93% of cases. The implications were staggering. For millions of years, the cultivation protocol had maintained galactic stability through methods that necessarily limited the development potential of most species. The collaborative frameworks had demonstrated that the same stability could be achieved while allowing civilizations to continue growing and evolving according to their natural patterns. But the real transformation went deeper than policy changes. Protocol beings themselves were evolving in response to exposure to collaborative thinking. Species that had operated as centralized management systems for millions of years were developing capabilities for distributed decision-making and adaptive response that they'd never possessed before. Zethrin, how are the other protocol regions responding to these changes? Tommy asked. Integration proceeds across 12 galactic sectors. Protocol entities in remote regions request human mediation teams to implement collaborative frameworks in their territories. Your species has become essential to continued galactic development. Elena looked up from her tablets with an expression of amazement that hadn't faded despite months of unprecedented discoveries. Tommy, we're not just participating in galactic civilization. We're helping it evolve into something it's never been before. The success had exceeded everyone's expectations, but Tommy remained focused on the practical challenges of managing a galactic transformation. 47 resistant species had become dozens of collaborative partners, but each partnership required ongoing mediation to maintain effectiveness. Human teams were stretched across hundreds of star systems, facilitating cooperation between civilizations that had been isolated from each other for millennia. Rebecca, what's our capacity for expanding operations? The Andorian cluster is requesting mediation support for integration with 3 protocol regions simultaneously. We're training our 5th class of interstellar mediators, Rebecca replied. Each class is twice the size of the previous one, and we're incorporating techniques learned from successful collaborations with each new group. At current expansion rates, we'll have human mediation teams in every active galactic sector within 5 years. Tommy considered the trajectory they were following. Humanity had gone from facing extinction to becoming central figures in galactic civilization in less than 2 years. But more importantly, they had demonstrated that evolution and cooperation weren't mutually exclusive concepts. Species could maintain their unique characteristics while contributing to larger collaborative systems that benefited everyone involved. Primary cultivator Zethrin's patterns shifted to what Tommy had learned indicated deep satisfaction. Mediator Chen. The cultivation protocol formally requests permanent partnership status for humanity in galactic management systems. Such arrangements have never been offered to species at your development level, but circumstances have demonstrated that traditional development metrics inadequately measure collaborative potential. The offer represented complete vindication of the strategy Tommy had proposed during that first desperate negotiation. Instead of accepting limitation or risking elimination, humanity had found a third path that transformed them into essential partners in galactic civilization. On behalf of humanity, we accept, Tommy replied, knowing that the decision would be ratified by Earth's leadership within hours. But we'd like to propose an additional framework. Instead of permanent partnerships, why not establish evaluation protocols that allow any species to earn collaborative status based on demonstrated capabilities rather than development level? Pattern Weaver Knight's form shifted through configurations that suggested rapid calculation. Proposal has merit. Species excluded from collaborative frameworks due to insufficient development might possess capabilities that current metrics cannot measure. Elena laughed with genuine delight. You're suggesting that we democratize galactic citizenship. Any species that can contribute to collaborative stability gets full participation rights, regardless of their technology level or expansion status. Exactly, Tommy confirmed. The resistant species taught us that diversity of approaches produces better solutions than standardized methods. Why not apply the same principle to determining which species get to participate in shaping galactic civilization? Zethrin's patterns indicated what Tommy had learned meant profound approval. Implementation of democratic collaborative frameworks would represent evolutionary advancement for galactic civilization itself. Protocol entities would need to adapt management systems to accommodate input from hundreds of additional species. But the results would be worth it, Rebecca added. We've seen what happens when diverse perspectives work together. Imagine what we could accomplish with input from every intelligent species in the galaxy. Tommy looked around the command center, seeing displays that showed collaborative projects spanning dozens of star systems and involving civilizations that had never interacted before humanity had facilitated their introduction. In 18 months, they had transformed galactic civilization from a managed system into a collaborative network that was producing innovations and solutions at unprecedented rates. The Bartender from Europa Station had become the architect of a new age of galactic cooperation. But more importantly, humanity had proven that their chaotic, adaptive approach to development could produce benefits that transcended any single species' capabilities. "All right then," Tommy said with the same calm confidence that had guided his most challenging mediations. "Let's get to work. We have a galaxy to democratize." The displays around them lit up with incoming communications from hundreds of species requesting participation in the collaborative frameworks. The real work was just beginning, but humanity had already proven they were capable of turning impossible challenges into unprecedented opportunities. The age of human mediation had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.